Hello, everyone. So excited to be here today. Jason and I have worked together and hung out together for years, so we're excited to be able to partner together to share some thoughts on an elastic talent strategy. We have a couple of agenda buckets here, so we're going to talk about the shift in talent acquisition, some things that maybe are breaking that maybe we need to look at differently. How do we bring teams together? Building your strategy, and then some things to think about. Jason, anything to add before we head into the first slide?
No, well, first, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with everyone today, and let's begin.
Let's go. All right. So we've got some news clips here that sound pretty grim, right? Like, are we really headed for a breaking point? Jason, when you and I were talking about this earlier, we're like, but does this really tell the whole story? It looks kind of grim, and it feels like we're in kind of a stressful space. But I'm wondering if when we think about this, this just allows us to think about work differently and think about bringing people into your organization at a different point or for different reasons. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You keep reading the headlines, even past the three that are in front of us now. There's no doubt there's a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty in the economy. We can read it, we can see it, we can feel it as HR and talent professionals and whoever else is on this call as our audience. So yes, there is truth to what we're seeing and what we're hearing. The stock market, just watch the ups and downs and the swings. However, this does, for me personally, feel a little bit different. As much as there is a lot of the layoffs and whatnot, there's also pockets where things are still growing. And me specifically in the mid-device world for the client that I'm supporting now, we are growing very aggressively. I also support a couple other technology companies where, again, there is a lot of hyper growth going on versus what you're seeing in the headlines. And so a lot of the conversations I have with not only hiring managers but candidates is it's not truly a candidate-driven market like it was maybe a couple years ago. The candidates have to be smarter when they're looking for that next opportunity to find the growing pocket. So yes, there is a lot of the bad out there, but there's also a lot of good. You just got to work at it harder to find it.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that are happening now, it's allowing candidates, it's allowing folks to think about their careers differently, right? Do I really want to do this? Do I need to do this? Do I want to work part-time? Do I want to work in a different field? Do I want to pay attention to the skills I have rather than just what my resume looks like? So I do think there's also an opportunity for folks to, I know this is a tired word, but reinvent themselves, especially coming out of the pandemic and some of the things that are happening. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity, as you said, Jason, to dive into those pockets of growth, but also maybe think about what do we need to do differently, maybe not just from a candidate perspective, but also from an employee perspective or an organization perspective.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. It's almost that inventory check. If you are impacted by a RIF or whatnot, it's unfortunate, it's a scary time, but it's a good time to self-reflect, as well as the companies that are going through it to adjust their recruiting style and how the work has to be done. So how do you accommodate that?
Right. Yeah, and so on this slide here, we've got some numbers that sometimes look a little daunting, but do these numbers, like, do they really tell the whole story? You know, we've talked about what does a backfill look like, and we've got some more discussion coming up later on in the presentation, but when we say 70% have positions to be backfilled, the question is, do they really need to be backfilled at a one-to-one? What does that look like, right? Is there more competition in the market, or are employers not looking for the right people? Are they looking for a resume as opposed to someone who can actually do the job, and maybe even better than what a resume would look like? Right, there is some of the attrition issues. So I know organizations, we have to focus on making sure that people are happy, especially in a digital world. You have to, you know, the pool tables and the free lunches don't necessarily engage folks anymore. And then, of course, there is that need to hire for new positions because our industries are changing really rapidly. So I'm wondering, like, when we look at these numbers, they look a little daunting or a little bit scary, but maybe we're just looking at them the wrong way.
Yeah, it's the black and white is always scary, right? If you have somebody leave, you got to fill it potentially. Kind of going back and piggybacking on what we just talked about, the intro, everything, it really, things are changing, right? So from a candidate side, yes, you have to self-inventory. Maybe you make yourself more open to other opportunities and stretch your skill set. Rebecca, you're a perfect example. You've been in TA forever, and now you morphed into this extra little role where you're using all your TA responsibility or experience and driving customer success, right? So maybe it looks like that. The other thing I will tell you that I've seen more recently from my recruitment chair is a lot of my jobs now are more fluid than they have been in the past, meaning I may have an open position, but I have a lot more autonomy to upgrade or downgrade a position at the whim of what the candidate pool looks like or how the hiring manager is feeling. And so it makes it a little bit harder to manage that process, yes, but there's a lot more fluidity in the numbers that you're seeing there and what that looks like. So the very first one, 70% need to backfill, but what does that really look like? I may have a job right now that needs to be what it is, but it could go left or right at any given moment.
You know, I was going to ask you, so you said that you have some flexibility in filling positions. Are you finding, because I know from my seat as a practitioner, hiring managers usually are pretty black and white, like I want this, I want all of it, I want, 100% of my qualifications. Are you finding that your hiring managers are a little more flexible on what they're looking for, or are they just more, not skill-wise, or let me say it differently. Are they flexible in what they're looking for skill-wise, or are they just more flexible in hiring somebody junior or senior? Does that make sense?
I would say both. And it's not the way it used to. Like before, as a recruiter, and for those that are recruiters on this call, you want to get that in a nice, neat box so you can go to market and not have a fluid job rec to go after and a fluid profile because it makes it that much harder. And nowadays, like you mentioned, it really can be, hey, I really want A, B, C, and D, and really find that niche purple squirrel or that really specific talent. Or it's like Jason, if you're finding X, Y, and Z, but it's a little bit less on the qualifications or years of experience, I could be open to that. Or if you find somebody conversely that has X amount more experience, I would be open to upgrading my job now. So it actually widens my ability to recruit from those types of professionals in that pool.
And that's really good to hear because, like I said, I think it was much more black and white in the past. So it's nice to hear that there's maybe some flexibility that's coming in and folks are realizing that I can't just do it the way I used to.
Yes.
Well, so let's ask the question of the folks on the call here with the poll challenge here. So what's the biggest challenge you're facing in recruiting today? And we've got some options for you to select. Is it, and we just came up with ones that we thought, so there may be others, but out of these, right, finding candidates with the right skills, are there unrealistic expectations from hiring managers, which we were just talking about? Is it a lengthy recruiting process? Are we still getting people bogged down in all of these assessments and lengthy applications? Lack of candidate volume? Is it too many applicants? Or is it, I'm trying to read what that says.
We aren't experiencing any
challenges. And I want to know who has that one.
Yeah, me too.
If you choose that one, we need to chat. We want
to
know what your secret sauce is, right? So take a second or two and go ahead and pick which one you think most closely matches your current challenges. I don't know. I think if I were thinking about this, it's interesting when we talk about finding candidates with the right skills because, as we were just talking about, what are the right skills? Like we have this idea of what the perfect candidate is, but there's so many other folks out there that could fit the job. Like for instance, you mentioned for me moving out of talent acquisition and into customer success. That wasn't something that I had been thinking about. I had no idea what customer success was, right? I was thinking my career was TA. And so when the opportunity came up from someone who I knew who was working at Eightfold and said, hey, your background would be great for this role, I was like, okay, let me check. And the skill sets actually transferred really well, but it's not something that I ever would have thought about. So that finding candidate with the right skills is maybe we just need to say finding candidates with skills that can do the job. I don't know, like, what are the right skills? What's the right resume? Let's find someone who's excited to do the job.
Back when you were in TA, when you're recruiting for that, finding the right skills is always, that's the $1 million question out of, I think, all of them. Because it's so subjective. You might have that, hey, this is what the right skill is, and I'm bringing something a little bit different to the table and trying to open the horizons a little bit. So what the right skills is always the million-dollar question. Interesting poll results coming through already.
Yeah, yes, and clearly the issue is not too many candidates. So it's very different from what it was a year ago when folks were trying to figure out how do we get through the volume of resumes. It does not feel like that's the case. And the number one challenge is what we were just talking about, right? What does the right skill look like? So that is super helpful as we think about that. And lack of candidate volume. And I'm guessing that's probably in a lot of different industries. I know, of course, we're seeing that in tech, but I know other areas as well, manufacturing, restaurant and retail, I know are struggling as a lot of people are switching gears or moving into something different. So only 0.7% of the folks on the call are not experiencing any challenges. So not to say that, you know, that way, I'm glad we're all in the same boat, that we're all struggling. I don't mean it that way, but, you know, it looks like everybody's experiencing some kind of pain that we're trying to figure out and trying to solve.
I still want to talk to the 0.7. What's the secret
That's
sauce?
right. Find us after, please. Well, what's helpful about this and what we're thinking about this, so one of the things that is imminent as we're thinking about what is this elastic talent, what does that look like? What's an elastic talent strategy? What does that mean? And I want to flip it first before I talk about anything here on the screen. Jason, I want to flip it to you to have you share a little bit about your journey as a career consultant, a career elastic talent professional. Like, what does that look like for you? Like, how did that end up to be your career path as opposed to doing what a more typical career path would be, that, you know, full-time employee in a particular organization for a length of time?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's what's so exciting about this whole presentation and leading us into the elastic conversation. For me personally, I realized a long time ago, and just so everybody knows, I've been in the consulting space and not a full-time employee for at least 10, 12 years now. And I just really enjoy this type of work in this type of space at a project level. So it allows me and affords me the opportunity to use all my experience on my tool belts to come into what I liken it to when there's forest fires in the West and you have the fire jumpers coming out of the plane and they got to come into a hot zone and put it out. That's what I get to do over and over and over again. And I just really love that experience. And it's almost an adrenaline junkie in a way to do that type of work and to be able to be that resource for any client that I'm working on. And it allows me to grow exponentially, in my opinion, as well. Again, because I am not only using everything on my tool belt, it's familiar situations that might not be the same, where I might have been in a similar situation in a financial service company, but it might not necessarily be the same in a technology company. But yet there's themes and things I can pull from my experience and then myself grow. So I have found myself, from a professional standpoint, grow that much faster than if I was a regular full-time employee.
Right.
Personally,
and we
I also
tried it, right?
yeah,
we
I did try it. You and I, and
we tried to work together.
I lasted about a year, and I'm like, sorry, Rebecca, this isn't for me.
You did a great job.
And really, what it comes down to is I just love to make those moves, and I personally do not. I'm at a point in my career where I just want to produce and provide subject matter expertise to whatever client I'm working with, and not necessarily buy in, or not buy in is probably the wrong word, but be part of that true organization. Now, there are organizations once in a while that it could be a purple squirrel, and yes, I would entertain that, where it might be the best opportunity in the world. But I just really enjoy what I do. And then I think about the last, again, 10 years, I've been in 14 different companies, which is a lot because I'm always turning things around.
But then you have that breadth of experience that you're able to bring to the table to your clients.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of
I will say real quickly, on the flip side, there are so many people that want to be a consultant, and they realize after 6 months to a year that this is not for them. Just because of the exact reason why I love it. A lot of people don't. There's just a lot of ambiguity in the contracting consulting world that you have to be able to mitigate and manage.
Yeah, no, that's a good call out. Well, as we think about this elastic talent strategy, what organizations are starting to look at, and it doesn't necessarily just mean hiring externally, but it could be repurposing folks, upskilling and reskilling inside your organization. So some things to think about. most Fortune 500 companies will be expanding their contingent workforce somewhere between 8 to 30% in the next couple of years. We really think that contingent hiring is becoming that permanent solution. And we've had a lot of folks who used to only apply to full-time roles start to consider that consulting space. So one of the things that we are starting to see as we're looking across organizations, and at Eightfold we talk to a lot of organizations, is looking at what does the market and the industry look like, right? We saw some of those earlier slides that talked about the workforce is changing, and we're hiring a ton of folks, and then we're reducing our forces. We're looking at backfills. We're looking at new projects. We're looking at things coming up that we haven't looked at before. I mean, even just looking at what jobs have come out of the pandemic or what jobs are starting to go away. What does that look like as we continue to digitize in our space? And so thinking about that, that elastic talent that there's something different coming to the market in order to allow folks to more easily adjust to the work that needs to be done in the time frame that it needs to be done in. So looking at that, either repurposing folks inside of your organization, maybe they're tired of what they're doing. It doesn't mean that they don't love a company, but maybe they've reached the top of their role, or maybe they've been doing it for a long time and they're ready to make a change. How could you take somebody inside of your organization and put them on different projects, right? Cross-functional projects, maybe areas that they haven't worked in, but you're helping your internal folks to grow and to change. Or maybe it is that you need to partner with external folks, such as like what Jason does, is you need to augment your recruiting team for a bit of time, or maybe you've got some really hard to fill jobs, or maybe there's new things coming into your organization that you just don't have the bandwidth for. So there's a lot of things that we're starting to see where the elastic talent strategy, flex workforce, contingent workforce, we've got lots of names for it, but there's a lot of benefits that we're starting to see folks take advantage of using a flexible workforce, as opposed to we've got a position we're going to backfill, we've got a position we're going to backfill. Yeah,
agreed. And it's what I'm interested in always watching now is whether we're post-COVID, are we still in? COVID changed how we all look. Yeah, what are we in?
Yeah.
But COVID is truly, we can all agree, has changed the workforce and how we look and how we want. Some companies are open to 100% remote. Some are hybrid. Some are wanting people to come back. And you can see some of the pushback from the workforce of, I don't want to go back and or enjoy the remote. How do I make that into elastic workforce, or elastic talent strategy? And like you, Rebecca, I've been on all three sides of the equation of this. Being an agency recruiter way back in the day, where I was placing contingent talent, I've helped build contingent programs from a corporate standpoint. And again, I'm a career consultant. So how do you fit all of that together, or how do you look at that in today's new world post-COVID? And help, like you mentioned before, if you have a RIF or you have this large layoff, how do you re-implement all those employees and all that knowledge base, maybe on a project consultative basis versus just cut and run and backfill?
Right. So let's get some opinions here from the group on the call. As you think about your contingent workforce population, your strategy, who owns that? We'd love to hear from you on where that lives, right? Because in some small organizations, and I know in my career, before talent ops was a thing, that came to me inside of TA. And so just as Jason talked about, right, I've created contingent workforce strategies. I've done all the training on it. I've partnered with all the agencies and figured out who are going to be our preferred partners. Some mid-sized companies to large companies may have talent operations that now works on that. And we also know that in some really large companies, and maybe small ones too, procurement handles that, or maybe finance, or maybe legal. So super interested to hear who owns the strategy, because that also then drives how folks come into your organization and who comes into your organization. So like on the last slide that we looked at, we talked about a direct hiring strategy. We do have a lot of organizations that we're seeing now that are not using third-party agencies, but are starting to do that direct hire themselves, where they will post a project as well as a full-time position and see who people, see what the candidates choose. So it is an interesting place to see where your talent acquisition, or excuse me, your contingent workforce strategy lives. And we'll see. We'll give folks another second or two. Oh, interesting. Okay. So interesting. My first thought was living in HR talent acquisition, which in my head that feels the most comfortable because you have the most control over it. But also interesting that there is, about a third of the folks here that don't have a contingent workforce strategy. So that's interesting on thinking about what that might look like for you. So hopefully a lot of the stuff we're sharing is going to be helpful. All right. So regardless of where your workforce strategy lives, we strongly believe that you need a partnership to create that strategy. It can't just live in procurement. It can't just live in TA or HR. There has to be that blend of connection, right? We have to think about not just the mechanics of it, but we also have to think about what kind of people are you looking to hire? Are your agencies or are the people that you're looking to bring into your organization, are they getting a very black and white profile? Do they have some flexibility like Jason talked about where you can say, hey, if they have this skill or this skill, what's that flex look like? So we really believe that best practice is to work with all the key teams in your organization to create that hiring strategy and then partner really closely with your talent acquisition counterparts, the folks that are actually going to, and then also the end users, right? The folks that are going to be working with these contractors. I know in some cases where it was my job to bring in a contractor, and it felt really weird just to say, hey, your new person is starting on Monday, right? Like that doesn't feel great. So we highly recommend that connection between all of the teams that will be working and supporting that contingent worker as you think about building that strategy.
Yeah, I would just piggyback and recognize for the larger companies out there that unfortunately can't partner as well. I've seen that too many times as also. So that is a big challenge when you get to this elastic workforce. Yeah, that sounds great, but how do we partner with it? And like you mentioned, Rebecca, it's a lot of times like, hey, here's your person, hiring manager, and they had no idea what was going on or what was happening. I've heard too many times with my hiring manager when I'm supporting a larger client where they just aren't getting the true traction from their third-party organization or the third-party contract, or not having a lot of control or input per se. So I realize, and I just want to recognize that's a challenge out there for everybody to work through. My solution is to keep trying to have those conversations with your third-party vendor to really refine what you're looking for and bring in the right elastic workforce.
Yeah, love it, for sure. And so piggybacking along with that, just a thought to throw out there is, do you need to change your backfill strategy? And we mentioned this earlier. Does it need to be a one-to-one with another full-time employee? And I am not saying that, there's that you should just throw the work someplace else or whatever, or eliminate the role. But I think there's a chance every time you have that position open, and especially in today's economy and where we're seeing is, there's less hiring, do more with less. Could you evaluate the work? Could some of it be automated? Could some be eliminated, right? I'm not saying to go ahead and throw it to everybody else and give them more work, but are there different ways to look at your backfill strategy? Could it be if some of that work could be eliminated and you could bring an internal person in to help with a project, right? Look for internals that have like half of what you need and then trust yourself to train them on that other 50%, give them that opportunity to stay with the organization. Jason and I were chatting earlier about all of that intellectual knowledge, all of the things that folks bring to the table that walk out the door when you let them leave. So is there an internal that you could bring in to help backfill some of those pieces? Or could you use a contingent worker to take on tasks, especially if the work is seasonal or cyclical, right? If you're thinking about maybe during tax time, if things really increase, you bring in contingent workers to help you figure that out, and then they go on to other projects. So you're not necessarily trying to continually manage that one-to-one FTE, especially if there are flexes in the work.
Yeah, there's not much I can add on top of that without just filling space and time. So, I completely agree for sure on that. I mean, there's just always I'm going to fill space and time, it looks like. There's always a chance to, use that internal knowledge if there was a layoff and bring them back, and or again, where I like to do it and explained earlier, if you do bring in a true consultant, I've had so many opportunities, and a lot of consultants have so many tools on their tool belt again, to plug and play with any opportunity or any project that's there with the client.
Right. And so to expand on that, thinking about different ways that you might want to use a contingent workforce. And that could be a lot of different things. It could be a temp. It could be someone who's just a short-term project worker. It could be a consultant. It could be a lot of different ways to look at partnering with elastic talent. So we talked about this, talent management, so keeping the talent inside your organization by helping to fill those roles with folks that are already in your organization. This partnerships piece has been really interesting for us here at Eightfold. And so using consultants and partners to meet our needs, we actually, because we do a lot of implementations with new clients, and we need to do it on their schedule, not on ours. So if we just build a bench on our professional services team that can handle X number of implementations, we're forcing the client to wait if they want to implement at the same time. So we actually have several partners that we work with that we then pull them in. They're an extension of our organization, but they lead that implementation for us. So we could potentially meet all of our clients' needs on their implementation timelines without having to overhire and then have to either let people sit on the bench or have to do a reduction in force. So that's one thing we do on our implementation side that has been a huge lift for us. And there's actually two organizations that were created, the folks that we tried to hire internally or that we said, hey, we want to partner with you. They actually created companies that now are right now focused just on our implementations. But if the work then slows down with us, they have the opportunity to pull in other clients. They don't have to worry about what does their future look like. Using that strategic planning as well, thinking about scaling your business and strategic planning. And Jason, I want to get your opinion on this. Like, I think in the marketplace, there's maybe a bit of a negative connotation on hiring a temp. We call them a temp, and that just feels really just kind of wah-wah. Like, I think there is something to be said about changing the way we look at contingent workers. It doesn't mean that they're temping because, you know, they can't get a full-time job or because they're lazy or whatever. I mean, I think we need to look at it from a perspective of people are working the way that suits them the best. But I'll stop talking because I want to hear what you think, Jason, especially about what we call.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because when you look at this slide and you talk about the corporate side, this is how my brain works on the consulting side in the consulting chair. And I look for the opportunities. I look for the clients that I can partner with, and whether they utilize my full experience or just part of it. So if I'm not fully utilized, then I am able to seek other opportunities where I can work simultaneously, right? You plug in one client, block out, plug in the other client, plug out. And so as a consultant, I look for the same model, the same everything flow as we see in front of us now. And then that's how the consultant model, consulting mind works, in my opinion. And I've talked to a lot of other people that do what I do across different businesses, not just in TA. And so then when you think about it as a company, if you just need to go a la carte, you can call somebody that can just do that for you today and then grow it from there, or do the whole function of what you're looking for and help scale and grow a business.
Yeah, because the word temp doesn't necessarily mean unskilled. It may mean that they are very skilled in a particular vertical or a particular area. So you would want someone who is highly skilled in that particular area. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not able to come in and do the job. I think in a lot of cases, sometimes they're a specialist as opposed to a generalist, and so they're able to get the job more quickly, get the job done more quickly with the expertise that they've gained. Agreed.
And I mean, at the end of the day, consulting, contracting, temp, it is all the same. There is some different definitions and whatnot, and tomato per se, but yeah, right. I think you don't want to overcomplicate something, but there is, I think, especially in the 21st century here and what we've already talked about with how COVID has changed everything, a little bit of a rebranding of what a truly a temp is. I don't think it's a temp. You're temporarily there as a consultant or as a specialist to help get from point A to point B for that particular project or client.
Yep, I love that. That's exactly right. Well, another way that we can think about using contingent workers is that future growth. So we have some thoughts that, oh wait, did I go back to, hang on. Yep, sorry. Clicking too fast, I apologize. So there's some other ways to think about what a contingent workforce could do for you. As we've already talked about, looking at new projects coming into play. We're looking to potentially automate things, or maybe there's more technology that you're adding. Maybe you're restructuring what your company does, or maybe you're adding a whole different department or adding something new into your organization. So you could use a contingent workforce group to be able to test out that area of growth, figure out, is this viable? Does it work? Does it not? And then you could create that department. But using that contingent workforce instead of hiring folks right into a role that you're not sure what it's going to look like might be a good strategy. Hiring freezes, we know that there's a lot of organizations right now are saying, hey, we're just going to stay flat. We're not going to bring new people in. Looking at your internal talent, you know, Jason, like you talked about, like, okay, so if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing and there isn't work and I'm just sitting here feeling like, I'm not adding to the organization, what if you were to pull in, especially when things are slow inside your organization, see if there's someone else inside your company that could do maybe clean up processes or help in different areas, or maybe they have expertise that they haven't been able to utilize, figuring out what those skill sets they have and then bringing them into to help to make sure the organization is working, not necessarily thinking about it by department, but thinking about it by complete organization. And then using contractors to manage those repeatable or consistent work functions that you have. Sometimes it is more efficient to be able to outsource that than it is to have somebody inside your organization doing some of those tasks. So Jason, for you most of the time have been brought in on a longer term consulting gig, right?
Yeah, normally I look for at a minimum 6 months. I mean, again, when you talk recruiting, there's not a lot you can accomplish in 30 days or 90 days. You're just really getting going and starting to have filling seats or putting the butts in the chairs per se, right? And so for me, and where I provide a lot of value and where I've discovered my niche is it has to be at least 6 months. Most of the time when I start 6 months, it's 9 to 12 to 18 months, right? So I do find the long-term projects. I will tell you, as well as helping, you know, drive this workforce and whatnot in projects and everything, is I worked with a client, a small technology client that just divested away or recently divested away from their parent company, and they're wholly owned or standalone right now with some private equity backing. And I was working with the VP of people, and I was the only recruiter, and the two of us developed a recruiting process, strategy, everything, and worked it simultaneously to get them up and running to where they're going. So again, a great way of using that elastic workforce of the consulted to not sure what the true client wants or what your team looks like. So let's bring in an expert from a consultative standpoint and stand this process up and fill my important seats. And then I can, as a client, they can take a breath and figure out what it is that they need.
Right. And there could be some cases where they don't need someone to come in for that 9 to 12 months, right? They've got the strategy figured out. They just need someone to come in. I need 15 sales folks in the next 2 weeks. If you bring in an experienced sales recruiter, they can come in. They've got already their toolbox that they can come in, bang out those hires, and then move on to the next organization. So it could be a longer term, but it could be just a short, like, hey, we know we're going to have, some needs in the spring and the fall, and we're going to bring in someone, and maybe it's a continuous, it's the same person that you bring in, you develop that relationship, and then you can bring them in just to hit those spots, and then, allow them to work with other clients to continue to build, their toolbox.
Absolutely.
So this is just a quick quote. I won't spend a ton of time on it, but we at Eightfold partner with the Defense Innovation Unit so this is an organization that focuses on accelerating commercial technology adoption. And they have said that looking at matching individual skills with short-term project requirements has really been important for them inside the Defense Department as they continue to scale and make sure that they're pulling in the right people at the right time. So that is a partner that we have with the DIU to help them look at skills-based connections rather than just resume-based. So just a cool little thought about how skills-based helps you pull in the right workers, whether they're short-term, long-term, or even a full-time hire. All right, so let's jump to another poll here. We would love to hear from you on which best describes your current approach to talent acquisition. Is it only looking to fill full-time roles? Are you right now looking primarily focused on full-time roles but open to contingent workers? Do you feel like you've got a 50-50 split? Are you focused mostly on contingent roles? Or maybe you're not privy to what's happening in the strategy department, so not sure. And I think, Jason, let me hear from you on which out of these, if you could create the ideal strategy, which one out of these do you think would be the ideal strategy for an organization to make sure that they're continually staffed and driving forward?
Loaded question, because if I'm talking self-preservation, I'm looking to fill full-time roles because that's my bread and butter, right? It's paying the mortgage. No, I would say really either the second one or the third one. So primarily focus on full-time, but open to contingent based, because that just opens the tool belts not only for me as a recruiter if I am managing both sides. Caveat this a little bit. I typically don't. I typically focus on all full-time now in the current state. But having that ability to open the tool chest to anything and everything, to really be a true consultative partner to my hiring managers, it was fantastic. I would lean more towards the second one than even the third 50-50 split.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like.
But that's from my perspective. It's a consultative approach there.
That's what I asked for, because you're in an interesting place, because you're a consultant, so you want to make sure, like you said, that's what you like to do, but you're also hiring full-time roles, which is what, so you've kind of seen both sides of that in your current role.
I definitely have to balance both sides, because I want to do what's right for my client or the project. So you need to bring a total solution. On the flip side, the faster I fill a role, the faster a project can end. And then as a consultant, we may have to find something new a lot quicker. Right.
So it looks like primarily folks are looking to fill full-time roles, although it looks like pretty close underneath that. There is full-time role focus, but open to using a contingent workforce. And there are some folks, I think that's very interesting, that 50-50 split between full-time and contingent. And I think that probably depends a lot on industry and potentially, location. All right. So we've talked about this. This is kind of wrapping up that thought about aligning contingent workers based on their potential. So looking at this is and let me say this first. We're not looking to say that agencies aren't a great partner, because I will tell you, I have friends who run agencies. I have friends who have worked for agencies. I have friends, I've worked for agencies before. So I'm not saying don't use third-party agencies, just saying that there's a way to partner with them to augment your talent strategy to be the most effective for you. And I'm always an advocate of looking to move people internally first. So if there is an internal and maybe they're not even looking for a particular role, but if you have a way, and I know Eightfold does this, where we can work with your current employees to help them identify the skills that they have and the skills that they want, and also internal roles that they might be interested in. That helps to fill that knowledge gap, helps them to continue to increase their skills, but also keeps that person inside your organization. So how can you fill your roles by looking at adjacent skills? And that's what I was just talking about as well, using AI to unlock the potential of candidates. The AI will make those connections for you. Maybe you haven't applied to a particular role or wouldn't think about it, but because of the AI and the ability to match skills, not just looking at keyword search on a resume, you may find some really interesting folks to do jobs that you would never have thought about. And also hiring based on skills. can help reduce bias. So you're not looking at a resume, you're not looking at where they've come from, you're looking at this is what I need to do the job, and this is the person that can fill it, whether that's internal, whether that's somebody through an agency, whether that's somebody that you know, pulling somebody in directly. There's a lot of different ways to think about getting the work done outside of just hiring a full-time person.
Can't disagree with anything you said on that either.
All right, I like it that we're not fighting on things.
Yeah, I know. I will tell you, in just the agency world, I can't emphasize that enough what you just said. We're not, even for me, I use agencies sometimes to find me my next opportunity. If it wasn't for agency recruiting, I wouldn't even be in front of you today and doing what I'm doing. That's where I got my start, and it was fantastic. So
and that's how you and I actually worked together on a contingent role, is that we both worked through an agency and got a chance to work together. That was the first time we worked together.
Yeah.
Was going through an
I
agency.
would say if you're looking to open up that elastic or contingent workforce, use everything that's in front of you. Obviously your network, the agencies, whatever you have in front of you, to fill that need, that painful need for you today, absolutely use whatever resource is there.
Yeah. So as we think about what does that look like, is that something that you would want to use inside of your organization? What does your organization's current contingent workforce strategy look like? And we've talked about this a little bit, but curious to know, do you have one? Are you involved in it? Is it robust, moderate, in process, non-existent? You know you need one but don't know where to start, or not familiar. So if you're thinking about that, not just when I need to hire someone, when I need to hire a temp, right? When I need to hire a contingent worker, I go to X. But that overall organization strategy. Interested to hear what y'all have to say about that. And I think, you know, a couple of companies that I have worked at didn't have one at all. And so that was important for me to make sure that we had the right agency partners. We had a lot of hiring managers who were just, anybody who would call them up would be like, hey, I've got a person. And the hiring manager would be like, okay, send them over. And all of a sudden you're like, got this person in that you don't know what's happening. You don't know that the money's not right, right? There's a whole bunch of things going on with that. So I know having a strategy is important. Otherwise you get, like when I started at a company way back, and they brought me in as to create their recruiting department basically, and they had agencies all over the place that were having like folks that are like, just go in a week early, nobody will know, just show up and they'll put you to work, like super crazy for all sides. So I think having a strategy, whatever it looks like, is important. All right, so it looks like there's a moderate, not familiar with the strategy. We know we need one, but don't know where to start. Okay. So most of the folks have a moderate strategy. Got it. And it sounds like similar to the poll that we asked before, pulling in people, being open to it as opposed to driving through a blended strategy.
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
Right.
I would also, I mean, this world it's not like it's just coming open today, like this elastic workforce. It's always been there. It's what is really interesting. And when you see these results is, again, with what we're going through, what we've been through with COVID and really trying to be open to a lot of different strengths and diverse talent pool, is that if you develop it or working that contingent workforce strategy, you're able to flex and bend with the economy and the economic drivers of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we're going to bring this home here. There's a couple of thoughts we wanted to leave you with, and then we'll leave some time for questions. But two things we want to think about from an organizational perspective, and then two things to think about from the contractor and the consultant space. So I'm going to talk to the two about organization, and then we can have Jason work on those two that talk about that contractor or consultant opinions. So the first thing that I would say is thinking about changing your perspective of contingent work, right? Not looking at it as temps, not looking at it as those agencies, but looking at it as how do we get the work done in the best and most flexible way? Is it external? Is it internal? Do we need to create more projects? Do we need to give our internal folks an opportunity to try new things? Do we need to basically make, you know, an internal consultant center of excellence around particular areas? I think changing the idea of it being very transactional and looking at it more from a strategic perspective, right? Work smarter, not harder, and using the right folks at the right time to do the jobs, as opposed to maybe forcing ourselves to think through maybe old lenses. And then piggybacking on that is changing the perspective of the value of the work. There's a lot of value to bring somebody in who has a deep expertise in a particular area. Yes, internally, you may be able to figure it out, but maybe it's going to take you a really long time. And you can bring somebody in and you can pay them to do the thing that you need to get done, do it well, and to be able then to move on to the next role. But I think thinking about the value of what contingent workers bring is a different way than maybe we've looked at it before. We've looked at it as, oh, we're only going to use a contingent worker when we give up or when we have a crappy task that we don't want to do, right? Like, how do you look at it as more strategic and the value of what somebody who has a deep expertise in a particular area can bring into your organization?
Yeah, and then I would say great segue, actually. And for those that are a consultant contractor or like me and have been doing it for a long time, or those that are thinking about doing it, I highly recommend you take a self-inventory, because going back to what I said in the beginning, what I really love is bringing calm to chaos. And there is no perfect project, right? So we might have something really fun and exciting, but we might, like you mentioned, Rebecca, just now, you might have that dirty work that nobody wants to do. You have to be able to do it all and really build out that diverse work history, again, for your tool belt. I know I sound like a broken record, but I can't stress that enough. You really have to really load up that tool belt with many different diverse experiences and opportunities. I was told a long time ago from a mentor of mine at the time, one of the value adds any consultant or contractor can bring is not being in one place for too long, because you become stale. If you've been in a contract for about a year or 18 months-ish, you should really start thinking about making an exit. And it just happened to me. I had one of the most perfect contracts in the world. If you looked at my LinkedIn profile, I'm talking about Abbott. Loved what I did, loved working MedDevice, great team, great leader. But I chose to make a change because I just got too comfortable and I needed to learn something new. So you always, again, if you're going to be thinking about doing what I do as far as a change in career, or again, if you talk to people like me, we really enjoy that calm to chaos. And then really find the roles that motivate you at the end. So in the beginning, you know, when I think about my career, I wasn't that choosy. I just took the opportunity, even bad ones, because the bad ones teach you what not to do in the future, to be honest. There's always a learning moment when you're a consultant. And then now, as I progressed in my consulting career, I am able to be a little bit more selective in what I do and find the consulting roles, the projects that not only motivate me, but fit me and fit the client to create that win-win. So it's a lot to think about from everything that you just said, is Rebecca, is what the organization and what those can do to what we as career consultants are doing and how you marry the two together.
Yeah, love it. All right, so we've left a little bit of time for questions. Any questions that we should be looking at? I'll let our moderators tell us if there's questions that they want to throw over the fence.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions that have come in from our audience. So I will start out with a question from one of our audience members. Many of our positions require specialized skills. Is there any development of pools of contingent talent to pull from for skilled labor?
Well, if that's for me, or I'll take a crack at that, and Rebecca, you can chime in from your TA days. I would say, yes, there are. In fact, I'm dealing with one right now at Inspire where I'm working through we're doing a contractor conversion, not me. And so the client the third party that we're converting from, his business model is solely MedDevice for the engineering, verification, testing space. So I've had long conversations with him and his business model. And again, this is one example, but if there's just one, there's going to be others across the country. where his business model is to focus solely on med device, solely on a specific part of the technology world, that verification and testing in the QA, and he goes and seeks those types of people and puts them out on projects. So my recommendation is use Google, and you sleuth it out, talk to your network, put it out on LinkedIn. Hey, this is what I'm looking for. Obviously, there are other social media channels, Twitter, TikTok, if you're a youngin, but put it out there, and you will receive information of how and where to look for these specialized firms. But they are definitely out there.
Absolutely. Piggybacking on that, right? Yeah, I think finding them on LinkedIn, but there are a lot of organizations that focus on just one or two particular slices, whether it's automotive or whether it's tech, whether it's sales. There are agencies out there, there are partners out there that focus on those particular areas. So yeah, use your network, and if you want to reach out to either Jason or I on LinkedIn, we can certainly help you. We've got a pretty extensive network between the two of us, so we'd be happy to help you find a partner if there's a particular skill you're looking to augment.
I mean, if you think about it too, just to add a little bit more, the big four accounting firms, I mean, they do audit and tax, but they are truly a consulting firm if you think about it, and that's how they grew their business, right? Their specialties in that niche. Same thing. Different, but same.
So another audience member wrote in, and Rebecca, you can take this one. Trying to understand whether Eightfold is primarily for TA applications or what extent it compromises a talent marketplace and skills-based career pathing tool. Can you clarify your target market / use cases?
Yeah, so Eightfold actually goes across all parts of the process. So we are ATS agnostic, and we sit on top of whatever applicant tracking system that you use. But we help folks, we have tools all the way from running your website into helping get a skills-based connection for your applicant so they can upload their resume, and then we will use our AI technology to match them to roles that organization has open. We help recruiters go through the talent acquisition process easier by making those connections on who would be the right skill fit, not only from current applicants but also from their talent pool. And then we also work on the talent management space, succession planning, project marketplace. So we don't really compete with any part of the process. Our goal is to make sure that your folks inside your organization are able to be as successful as possible. And that means your recruiters being able to match folks to jobs, getting folks hired more efficiently, but also in your talent management space, understanding if somebody wants to move into a new role, what are their potential learning gaps, how can they get training courses, and how do they fill those gaps, and then move on to those roles that they're interested in. So I know that was a really quick, high-level explanation. If you want to talk further, certainly reach out to me after the webinar.
Another audience member wrote in, and you both can take this question as well. How do you convince stakeholders to consider more contingent workers rather than strictly focusing on full-time roles?
Yeah,
that's a loaded question. If I had the real answer, I don't know if I'd be talking to any of you. I'd be on some private island somewhere. Do you want me to go first on this one?
You start.
You know, and I'm going to take this from the perspective of I'm trying to fill a job and working with a hiring manager, and it really comes down to what the role is and what the strategy is, and really setting that expectation at the very beginning of the meeting, and truly understand when you open a role. I truly look to drive and understand what the true vision is for this position. And so, again, this is where you talk about having a consultant there. I've been through many different scenarios where if it doesn't sound like it's truly an FTE or a full-time position to put somebody in there and build a career, then why not try to use this as a contingent fill or contingent hire until we can really understand what it is you want, Mr. Client. So it's a little bit of a political answer, I guess, but it really takes in the recruiter seat, it takes an understanding of what the goal is of the open position and walking your hiring manager through what they really want and understanding and listening to what they want and building that from there.
Yeah, and I think when you are working with your hiring managers, if you've got a really tough role, I know when I worked for Target Corporate and I was working on technology and we were working on architect positions, I mean, I could tell you where every architect was across, solutions architect across the country and even across the world. And there just weren't that many for what we needed to do for Target Technology. And so there were absolutely times when we said, here are the 4 people that can do what you need us to do. I will continue to work on them. However, in the short term, instead of leaving that position open, let's bring in a consultant to help get things moving. And then when we are able to find someone to fill this on a permanent basis, if we still need that, then I'll continue to keep the search open. But sometimes your hiring managers, I think just being really realistic about what that talent marketplace looks like, right? If you have the data, I know we are able to show that with Enable, but there's lots of other platforms that can show you the data of where people are at, how many folks actually can do that position. I've always found that the more data I can bring to my hiring managers about what's happening and why it's happening, it's easier to help them consider a non-traditional candidate or bringing in a consultant for a short time or looking at the position differently. So I think for me, I would say data is always the best way to get a hiring manager to understand what some of the challenges you may be facing in pulling in somebody full-time. And that could be compensation too, right? I mean, I know it's tough sometimes on the comp side.
Yeah, and just to continue bringing that full circle, it also know the whole market. So when you think of technology and IT and all the things, there are so many different avenues to go through. If somebody wants to fill just a software engineer, that is a pretty open requirement. So that should be fairly easy. But now when you start layering on all the info security and the cybersecurity, that's becoming really a niche. And there are not as many people around. So to really echo what you're saying, Rebecca, that's where, again, I would do the same thing. Like, listen, if it's an easy role, we can do this. But if you're really looking for this niche, what we call in the recruiting world, the purple squirrel, you absolutely would bring that contingent workforce in to help cover any pain point while you find the full-time employee or the full-time fill.
Right.
Just reinforce what you just said is basically.
I love it. We're on the same page. Love it.
That's why we work well together.
That's right. That's right. All right. I think we're right at time. I don't know, Rashonda, if there's any other questions or if we're thinking to wrap up.
We can squeeze in one last question.
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll talk fast.
Can you expand more on the use of AI to unlock potential of candidates?
Yeah, so I'll talk about Eightfold because that's what I know. So we have over 1.5 billion data sets that we have looked at. We've pulled them apart. We've looked at all of the contingencies, career pathing, growth, what skills folks use in particular roles, what titles look like. So we've looked at all of that that anonymized information, and that has really helped us to then put together a machine learning, a explainable AI process to look at someone's background. So for instance, you look at a resume, there's a lot of words on it, and most systems will use keyword matching to say, hey, this is a great fit. You go out to LinkedIn, you put in your search, and you get back a short list of candidates. If that doesn't look right, then you open that up and you start looking for folks maybe who have different keywords. AI will do that skill-based connection without the keyword, because you can't always put everything on your profile or your resume. And so this will look and say, the AI will be able to say, because they've done this role, they've done this, even if that particular skill isn't listed specifically on their resume, we're going to infer that they have it based on all of the other information that we've looked at from other people in particular roles, similar roles, industries, and backgrounds. So the AI helps make those connections, which is not saying that we can't do that. I mean, I've had roles that I've worked on where it's taken me 2 to 3 weeks to find someone that has the skills that have the skills that particular role was looking for. This just does it more quickly and makes those connections without us having to do as much digging.
And I'll be quick on this. I promise not to take 20 minutes. But I would say on one step further, as a recruiter seat using AI, find a way and research your own ATS as it is now and start bucketing, compartmentalizing. Did I say that word right? Sorry. Putting them in the right buckets by using like hashtags or labeling or your candidate profile so they're easily to search and while you're building that inventory system of candidates. right? So that way they're not just getting lost in the masses. If you really find somebody not only like on paper, but you've liked them when you talk to them, put a tag on them in your ATS if it allows, and that will help leverage that system a lot harder as well.
Or use Eightfold, and we'll make it really easy for you.
That's it.